I think Islam hates us.
They have done nothing except wreak havoc and terror for our faith and our religion.
When we stand up to those who oppress our communities, that Allah accepts from us that as a form of jihad.
Foundations of society are fragile. We must be the shepherds of our own civilization.
Anyone answers either yes or no without making necessary distinctions, both are not telling the truth. They're lying.
Father, we pray that your word will become a hammer that breaks rocks into pieces. That you will raise up in this nation pulpits and prophets that will call the nation back to repentance.
Will you distance yourself from those who think differently, or will you join us at the table and talk about what is really important? This is the Al-Ma'idah Initiative, conversation without compromise.
Sheron, great to meet you.
Great to meet you too.
So this is I guess you don't have a public release of the movie yet.
I think we only had like 2 weeks run for it. It's like really in a small screening with the help of the Film Development Council of the Philippines. We didn't have like a massive commercial release.
So I didn't realize that when I saw the movie. So I was really privileged to be able to see it. So I'm glad I got to see it.
Thanks.
Tell me a little bit about yourself. How did you get into this world, and how did you start making movies?
Actually, I started out as a visual artist way back in my province in Zamboanga City, and then I think I was in college. We have a subject, media and philosophy. So what we do during our class is just we watch films, and after that, it's really art house. I didn't know that art house exists. I mean, in the province in Zamboanga, it's rare that you have an idea about independent filmmaking. So, yeah, to my surprise, I fell in love with films without me realizing it, and I thought to myself that I want to become a filmmaker. But that time I was taking up philosophy with the idea of taking up law school after college. But it didn't materialize because by that time when I was in third year college, I realized that I really want to pursue filmmaking. So after that, I just finished my course. That would be AV philosophy. I just finished it, and then after that, I went to Manila, and I told my parents that I need to pursue my dreams. And then I worked while supporting myself to go back to school. Like, that's not really a formal schooling, but rather it's more like workshops. And then after like 2 years in Manila, I went back home and started out doing documentaries, developmental documentaries for NGOs. So that's where my experience in filmmaking started by doing documentaries.
And then is most of that based in? So you're from the island of Mindanao, right?
Yes, yes.
Am I saying that right?
Yeah, you're right about
Yes.
that.
Okay. I practiced before this
Yeah,
episode.
yeah.
So what's the sort of film scene like there? Are you one of the few people actually doing filmmaking in that part of the world?
Yeah, during that time, I think around like 2005, there's not much filmmaking scene in my city. Like, but in some parts of Mindanao, that would be Davao, there's already an emerging group of filmmakers. But in my hometown, the idea of independent filmmaking doesn't exist. So what I did is to reach out for some colleagues in Davao, and then we exchange information. I attended their festival and stuff like that. So that's how I got exposed first in terms of the film environment, film community in Mindanao.
So I'm really curious to get some of the background. So what's your interaction with the Muslim community in Mindanao? How did you get connected to that community?
When I was in college, I was a member of this organization. The name of the organization is Social Awareness Community Involvement Office. It's a program under the University of Ateneo de Zamboanga University. So it's like a social arm, social political arm of our school. So there are a few of us who volunteered to be part of this office of this program, and there we got exposed to the different facets of our society in Zamboanga. So that's how I got exposed and connected with the Muslim culture, their tradition and culture, and like that. So, and during my first few years when I was doing developmental documentaries, most of the projects I did was about Mindanao, about Muslim Mindanao, to be specific. Rarely did I do content on indigenous people like the Lumads, non-Moro, but mostly more on the Moro tribe. At first, it was really more of a passion for filmmaking, but eventually it turned out to be a passion for a calling to, because I got exposed to the plight of the marginalized Muslim Mindanao. So I realized that there is a need to tell their narratives. So that's how my passion for filmmaking, specifically about Mindanao, started.
Explain. So I guess Women of the Weeping River is mostly about into this sort of into Muslim conflicts, but how are these people marginalized in the greater Philippine culture?
For one, since time immemorial, marginalized in the sense that number one, there's in terms of assistance coming from the national government, like infrastructure, education, also all sort of basic needs that a national government should provide. They fail to do so in this area, in this region, Muslim Mindanao. And also, before the history of, the Spanish colonialization, there's already an existing government in the south, and that is the Sultanate of Cebu. And through time, through the influx of, in fact, Spanish invasion, American invasion, they were suppressed. Their culture their system of government were crushed. So to the point of they lost that sultanate eventually got scattered and lost control over their region. So that's how they became marginalized.
What I found really interesting about the movie you made is that watching it, I feel a lot of resonance with it, because you can tell that you really love these people as a filmmaker. Yet you're still willing to very pointedly tackle some issues in that culture that, from watching the movie itself, I, as an outsider to the Philippines, wouldn't have necessarily got an idea of these larger issues, except in this kind of subtext throughout the movie and in the last scene. It's really taking a pretty in-depth look at some things that are going on in the Muslim culture in the Philippines specifically.
Yeah, I'm sorry. What was the question? I'm sorry.
So it really seems to be addressing something of the Muslim culture in the Philippines specifically, in that part of the Philippines.
Uh-huh.
And so how much of this? So first of all, would you describe the sort of basic premise of the movie for our listeners, and then I'll kind of ask you some more questions about that.
Yeah, the basic premise of the film.
Yeah.
The basic premise of the film, it's about a blood feud between two Muslim families that has been going on for generations through the perspective of two women. Yeah, that's the basic premise.
And so how commonplace are these kinds of blood feuds in Mindanao?
It's the thing about it is it's part of their culture already. Each region in Mindanao, they have a different term or label they call for a blood feud, but in the academic definition, they call it rido. Locally, they call it rido, but each region have their own label for that. But in general, it's called rido or blood feud, and it's a deeply rooted. It's deeply rooted. It's deeply rooted in their culture. This culture of violence. So that I have been saying that in order to address a bigger political issue in Mindanao, it's very important to take a look at this deeply rooted culture of violence, this cycle of violence, which is really their way of life, unfortunately. Yeah.
That's, I mean, it's absolutely fascinating. So who are the people in the region who are trying to stand against this cycle of violence?
There is a commission already created by the local government. Right now, it's the Bangsang Moro. They have a new word, the new term for that. But before that, it's the Armed Autonomous Region for Muslim Mindanao. They have a specific department of that government where they do initiate programs on how to address this what we call RIDO. Specifically, they are training or they are giving platform for older women to initiate this program, which is to address the problem of blood feud, because they see the value of women as crucial in the negotiation. So basically there is an intervention coming from the government to address this problem. From when I say government, hello?
Hey, yes.
Yeah, I'm sorry. When I say government, it's the local government, the Autonomous Region for Muslim Mindanao.
And how much progress is that making right now?
I believe it's getting better. But of course it's always difficult. I remember when I was doing my research a few years back that this woman mediator, I think male mediator, was killed, was assassinated because he initiated this attempt to reconcile these two feuding family. But from my understanding and research, it's slowly getting there, slowly addressing the problem of blood feud by creating, shall we say, a module, like a program, like a module on how, it's more like a study, a module where each community leaders can actually use this as a template to not really educate, but to let their community understand why blood feud should be addressed.
So were you filming all this actually on location?
Some of them, the parts where it says Holo, it was really shot in Holo, but majority of the film was shot in Zamboanga City, which is my hometown, because shooting in Holo, the setting of the film is supposed to be in Holo Sulu, but majority of the film was shot in Zamboanga for, because it's really hard to go to Holo Sulu to shoot the film. And for one, for security reasons, and second, it's mainly also because of the financial constraints, limitations of going there.
One thing that absolutely blew my mind that Eduardo told me was that these people in the movie are not actors by profession.
Yes, they are all non-actors. Yeah, I mean, every one of them, it's their first time to actually act in the film, and we went through a rigorous process in screening, in casting, and then we provided them 2 weeks of training. But the method that we use is what we called, as coined by our mentor Armando Binglao. He's also the same mentor of Brillante Mendoza. So we call it found acting. So basically, found acting, the basic concept of that is that they don't have to really memorize the script, and they would act accordingly. I mean, they would act according to what the scene requires. They don't have to memorize. They don't have to anticipate on what's gonna happen in the shoot. So basically, though they have a script, I didn't ask them to memorize it or to really, to go through the process of like really getting familiarizing themselves with the script.
Yeah, and it was such a believable performance. Now, is that possibly because the people acting in those roles had kind of lived through a lot of the story you were telling personally?
Yes, that is correct. Part of the casting really is really um, complementing the character to the actors. For example, our main character in the film, Satra, who is the main lead, she had a personal experience where her father was assassinated, was killed, also due to blood feud. Um, the other main character, who is Farida, in reality, in real life, she also does mediation. She does mediate in some family conflict in their community. So basically, it's really one major ingredient importance in casting is really understanding their background and see if they perfectly fit with the character that they will play.
So when you made this, I was so curious the whole movie to kind of get inside your head, and I'm surprised and very happy that I get to have this conversation with you now, because I was really curious what the kind of worldview was behind what you're trying to say in the movie. Like, how did you go about making that? Did you just want to tell a good story, or did you want to make a point? How did you decide you wanted to make this movie?
Before I did Women of the Weeping River, for many years I've been doing a lot of documentaries. I've been immersed with in the different parts of Mindanao. My first film, entitled Halaw, it's about people crossing the borders of the Philippines to Malaysia. And then after that, I went through a lot of I basically, the basic idea is that what I'm trying to say is I fully immersed myself with the community, with Muslim Mindanao. And then and that idea of wanting to really just do a film turned out to be a calling. It's not something that I thought of. it's just something that I realized and came about. Yeah, it's unexpected. So that's why it's very important during the process when I was developing the script of Women of the Weeping River. I'm really careful on doing my research. So actually, it took me like 3 years to write the script, and there were like I think 12 revisions just to make sure that it's accurate, it's balanced, and it's really truly speaks with what the narrative of the Muslim Mindanao is. So yeah.
And have you got any feedback on the finished product from the Muslim Mindanao community?
Yes, they were all pleased, and some of them were actually surprised that even if I'm not a Muslim, I was able to tell their narrative in a very non-judgmental way, the way they want it to be reflected. So there's a lot of positive response coming from the Muslim community, mainly because part of the process I consulted with them as well. So it's not like I just wrote it and then I just shot it. It went through a lot of screening process and went through a lot of consultations before I actually shot the film.
That's great. And I've had a very similar experience in interacting with the Muslim community, in that I think there's a way, like you say, you can tell their story in a way that's very judgmental. And there's two wrong ways to go about interacting with other cultures. One is you stand on your hill, you look down on them, and you think you're better than they are. The other way, though, is to be completely, oh well, that's their culture, we don't have anything to say to you. And that's what I loved about this. You can tell that you love the people. Mm-hmm. You're resonating with their story, but you're also making some critiques, which is quite a brave thing to do.
Yeah. It's something that I openly discussed with my friends. I'm pretty open with my Muslim friends about it, because it's something that needs to be discussed. It's something that needs to be put out there, because sometimes, as what they said, sometimes they may not see because they're part of that. They may not be able to see that these things should be, it's something that should be discussed. So it's a great opportunity that this film became a platform for that, through their help, of course. Yeah.
Right. So you're coming along as a partner in the story, not as a judge.
Yeah, exactly.
What would your hopes be for the next steps? What do you think Mindanao needs right now, more than anything else?
Right now, it's really about as what I always discuss with my friends. It's always about the healing. Because for many generations, for since time immemorial, there's a lot of historical grievances against the Muslim community. So I think the first step really is that healing process, because it sounds like, it sounds academic, but it's true. I mean, that pain, that struggle is being passed on from generations to generations. So that anger wouldn't stop. So the first part is really healing for both the abused and the aggressor. And also, for the government part is really to provide the basic, as simple as water. For a lot of us, water is something that can easily be ignored. But for these people, as simple as water means a lot to them, because mainly they don't have that proper access. So by providing this basic need, that would be a good start for that reconciliation, for that healing process. So I think before going to a more political platform in addressing the problem is to go through this healing process, and that includes forgiveness, that includes providing these basic needs.
So, if you were speaking to the average, loosely Catholic Mindanao, what do you think they need to realize about what do they need to do as far as taking steps for forgiveness?
I think for the first thing that they need to I usually tell my friends is that it's easy for them to make judgment because the idea of Muslim struggle, the idea of Muslims, the concept alone of that is there is an indifference. There is a distant reality. Even in my hometown where I grew up, there is a big distance between the Muslim and the Christians. Though it's not hostile to each other, but there is a huge gap. So what I normally tell my friends is give it a chance. I usually say give it a chance. Like us, I mean, they're also like us that is worthy of of respect, of dignity, and we should learn to share that equality with our Muslim brothers and sisters.
If you're then reversing that and you're talking to the average Muslim Mindanao, what do they need to internalize and act out?
Of course, I would say the same thing. There's also a prejudice against Christians by the Muslims. It's something that it's not be taken away that easily. I remember when I was in Camp Darapanan. Camp Darapanan is the MILF camp, the Moro Islamic Liberation Front camp. During that time, it was still in a ceasefire between government and the MILF, the Moro Islamic Liberation Front. I was there sitting amongst our Muslim brother there, and suddenly this soldier said, you're a Chavacano, you are from Zamboanga, you're traitors, right? And it's I didn't get mad at him, mainly because he like some Christians, he didn't understand where I'm coming from. So I think it's really important that we first understand each other before making that judgment. I'll tell my Muslim friends that we all share the same grief. We all share the same pain. It's really just a matter of allowing ourselves to be known, allowing ourselves to be acknowledged, so that we get to understand each other.
Then the conversation progresses, right? Because everyone's experienced some grief. What then is the outlet for somebody who has lost a father, lost a son, lost a brother to these blood feuds or these historic grievances? Like how do you heal that pain?
I personally, I may not be able to answer that question, but I once asked that question to a friend, actually to the lead actors of the film, who played the role of Satya, because she's a victim of that. I asked her, how was she able to move on with her life? And the first thing that she said is that she learned to accept whatever she'd been through, and she learned to forgive herself as well, because at some point there's this certain guilt that she wasn't able to do something for her father, and also a forgiveness for those people who inflicted pain towards her. So that's what she answered, and because of that she was able to to build a life again. They're already orphaned. She doesn't have a parents. She only lives with her aunt. So after the death of her father, who is so dear to her, going through that process of acceptance and forgiveness, she was able to build her life again. So that's how she did it. So I may not be able to personally answer that question, but I use as a reference my friend, the actress of the film.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Although all of that's obviously easier said than done.
Yeah.
So how is being exposed to this, if you don't mind me asking, impacted your view of the world? So were you raised in a Roman Catholic family?
I was actually raised in a Protestant evangelical family.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. So pretty much our family is a bit conservative in terms of view towards the Muslim culture, the Muslim community. I think in our family, it's only me who are pretty open to actually create that relationship with the Muslim brothers and sisters. So I'm sorry, what was the question again?
I'm just curious. So I'm just curious how interacting with the Muslim community has kind of grown your own worldview, like changed the way you look at the world.
It's my perspective changed in the sense where it's not just about seeing Muslim community, but rather humanity as a whole. That at the end of the day, regardless of race, religion, ethnicity, gender, we all have the right to, for dignity, for respect. So that's what I've learned by establishing or creating that relationship with them. It's not just about understanding or at least having a glimpse of their struggle, their perspective, but really looking at humanity in this sense that everyone deserves dignity, deserves some respect.
Yeah, and honestly, listening to your journey with this and the part of the world you're from, it's actually amazing how much it parallels the West's relationship with Islam on a larger scale as well.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's all these histories of wounds. You've got things like 9/11, but then you've got the US and Britain overthrowing the Iranian government and all this interference in the Middle East, and they attack us, we attack them. And it's easy just to turn these people into kind of cartoon bad guys that we just don't interact with, rather than treating them, as the Bible says, as image bearers of God with dignity, value, and worth, who God himself cares about.
Mm-hmm.
If you were to speak to, because probably a lot of the Filipinos I'm going to interact with are Protestant Christians, what would your hope be for how the Protestant church could grow in kind of befriending the Muslim community there in the Philippines?
Okay. But back in college, we have this, what we call it, the interfaith dialogue. I think the basic concept of that is really recognizing that beyond religion, beyond ethnicity, I always go back to this main concept that we are all one. We are, we all in terms of, we need to give respect to humanity. I mean, it goes back to that. Sometimes it's really, you don't, like, for example, in my religion, I wouldn't tell my pastor or my family discussing about faith, about religion, but really talking about, the what is similar, what the similarity that we share with the different ethnicity that beyond religion.
But even with that, I think what's interesting about what you do is that there definitely is a kind of critique of some ideas in the movie. So how do you balance seeing, one humanity with these kind of ideas of blood feuds? And you've certainly got some people who are saying this shouldn't happen, but also other people saying, oh, we have to do this. This is right. This is good. This is how life is supposed to work. How do you push back against those kinds of ideas while loving the people?
I think my understanding, I could be wrong, but my understanding is that it isn't really their choice to be part of this blood feud. If they have a choice, they would want to be part of that. It's just that they were born and raised seeing this blood feud already, and that they're already part of this cycle of violence or vendetta. So it's not something that they wish that they are part of, but rather, of course, my impression, like, if I'm not sure if I'm right, but my impression is that if they have a choice, they would be part of that. So that's why it's a good thing that the government, the Autonomous Region for Muslim Mindanao, initiated this program to shed light on this culture of violence, which is the blood feud.
Seems like this movie is important because, as you were saying, the government has to do one thing, but there's got to be a wider cultural move with individuals first. And that's exactly what this kind of movie is facilitating. It's inviting people to view the humanity of others and join people on their journey rather than seeing them as outsiders.
Yeah, that is true.
What's next for your career?
Right now, I'm developing my new project. Actually, we're shooting soon, around this April or May, but it's going to be set in Manila. And the title of the project is The Gospel of the Beast. It's something not directly related to Muslim Mindanao, but it's related to violence in general. So the basic idea is the Gospel of the Beast is that how a person from being innocent transformed into a beast, figuratively and literally. And especially especially now with what's happening in our country, in the Philippines, where violence seems to become a normal thing. So as a filmmaker, I thought I may not be able again to find answers, but at least open a discourse or a glimpse on why people succumb to this violence wherein they actually find satisfaction and power, and they love why some people love violence, so that's basically the idea, the theme of the film, The Gospel of the Beast.
Yeah, that's a really fascinating title. And is this going to be in Tagalog this time?
Yes, that's going to be in Tagalog.
Great.
Yeah.
I'm whenever I can find that, I'll watch it because that sounds fascinating.
Thank you.
Maybe we can do a show on that. For both Filipino and international listeners, where can people go and find your work?
I'm not sure what's the plan of TBA. They handle the distribution and sales. But my understanding is that last year, 2 years, we had a run in France, all across France, but in a small cinematheque, in a small theater. So that's as far as I know. I'm not sure because the TBA handles the distribution and marketing.
Thank you so much for being on the show. And thank you guys for listening to the Almeida Initiative podcast. We will be back next week with another episode.